Welcome everybody our supporting patients with diabetes, vision loss, and language barriers. So we have a lot to get through today, and I'm really excited to welcome our guest panelists today. Just to kind of introduce everyone briefly. Um, so I think the person I've known the longest is Tom Tobin. We've met at conventions and things like that, and he was probably the first person I thought of to join us in regards to managing diabetes. And Tom has worked in a lot of different things, but he's really great at development and runs his own consulting firm and is part of the Accessible Insulin Pump Task Force, and has been on that for many years. And he is joined from the task force, Patricia Maddox, who is a diabetes educator for many years, and she has worked with Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, the National Federation of the Blind, and the American Diabetes Association. So a lot of experience there. And then we also have Veronica Elsey. She has her bachelor's degree in music, but is very passionate about Accessible Task Force. Oh my gosh, Diabetes Task Force. And you're actually the chair, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, of the committee. So they're
indeed.
going to provide all their expertise in what's going on in the field of diabetes. And then on the research side, we have Cambry Wen, who is a pharmacist and a professor at the University of Iowa, as well as founder of her own company, Decipher Drug Information Services. So she provides and helps other companies to provide critical information to patients and doctors about medications. And she has been doing research, and she's going to tell us about her research. And she's actually going to start us out today.
All right. Thank you, Charla, and thank you to everybody who's here today. So as Charla stated, I am a pharmacist and adjunct faculty at the University of Iowa College of Pharmacy, specifically in the pharmacy practice and science department. And on this slide here, there is a photo of an aerial view of the Iowa campus next to the Iowa River. So my area of research has been focused in the health equity space. And with this particular project, it is focused on evaluation of diabetes care provided by pharmacists to patients with visual impairment. So there are parts of this project that we are currently still working on and still running data analyses. So I'm happy to share what we've learned so far. All right, I do have to disclose we received funding from the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, or PhRMA. The grant title was Collaborative Actions to Reach Equity, or CARES grant. We received that grant in 2024. We'd like to note they have no participation or oversight in designing the study or have any role in interpreting the results as well. So to provide some background in diabetes, so based on 2021 data from the CDC, 38.4 million adults have diabetes, and 11% of adults with diabetes experience some degree of vision loss. And based on the literature, patients with visual impairment experience higher rates of poor quality of care related to their diabetes compared to individuals without visual impairment. So the goals of our research project, the first looking at how can we address the health disparities, and we're doing that by evaluating the needs of patients with visual impairment, including those from ethnically diverse backgrounds, related to the management of their diabetes therapy. So the study obtained patient perception of pharmacists providing diabetes care. And then on the flip side, identified gaps in the pharmacist's knowledge in providing care to these patients. And then the other part of the study is looking at accessibility of drug information materials of diabetes treatments. So in looking at quality of care, we partnered with a survey distributor, Dynata. They were responsible for recruiting eligible patients and pharmacists for the project. The questionnaires were administered in mid-May and ended when the sample size was met, so approximately 3 weeks later. So one thing I do want to note that our sample size was directly correlated to the funding available. So for the patient questionnaire, we were able to get 610 patients, 487 were white non-Hispanic, 409 identified as female, 157 patients had a visual disability, and the median age was 54 years. So the majority of the respondents, over 90%, took at least 2 medications for diabetes, and over 70% have been diagnosed with diabetes for at least 4 years. So for the patient perspective, we asked the patients questions regarding their diabetes care as provided by the pharmacist. So we provided 10 statements and asked the patients to denote their level of agreement with each statement. And this was based on a Likert scale of 1 being strongly disagree, up to 5 being strongly agree. So overall, the patients were satisfied with the diabetes care provided by their pharmacist, and that included counseling, so use of appropriate language, use of non-visual cues and methods, answering questions about diabetes, referring the patients to accessible resources, and just having knowledge on accessible technology and assistive tools. So that's great to see. We also asked the patients, how can the pharmacist improve delivery of care to them? So there's a few themes that we saw in the open-ended comments. So the first being accommodations. So disability and accessibility accommodations, for example, large print or braille labels, more pharmacist awareness of disability-related needs, and having tools for communication or medication adherence. Additionally, another theme we saw was cultural sensitivity. So training in cultural sensitivity, having respect for cultural dietary patterns and health beliefs, incorporating traditional remedies into patient care conversations, hiring more diverse pharmacy staff members, and offering language support for non-English speakers. And then lastly, access was a major theme that we saw across many patient comments. Cost was among the most common aspect that was brought up. And there were also suggestions for delivery or mobile services for those with transportation barriers. So switching to the pharmacist questionnaire, we were able to recruit 102 pharmacists. The median age was 37 years, 61 pharmacists identified as female, 75 were white, non-Hispanic, and 48 pharmacists worked in the community pharmacy, while 24 pharmacists worked in the hospital systems. And these were the most common practice settings that the respondents worked in. In terms of years in practice, 95 of the pharmacists have been practicing for greater than 4 years, and 22 identified themselves as a certified diabetes educator. So similar to the patient questionnaire, we asked the pharmacist, so what is your self-perception in providing diabetes care to patients? So similar setup in terms of providing 10 statements that were based on the Likert scale, 1 being strongly disagree, and 5 being strongly agree. So I've created a table here. I've pulled 3 statements that had a higher degree of agreement amongst the pharmacists. So the first is, I am confident in providing culturally responsive diabetes care to patients with visual impairment or disability from ethnically diverse backgrounds. So we had 69 pharmacists, or 67.6% of the pharmacists agree with that statement. The next statement, I am knowledgeable on available diabetes medications that are accessible for this patient population. So 77 or 75.5% of the pharmacists agreed with that statement. And then lastly, I know where to obtain accessible drug information for patients with visual impairment or disability. So lower percentage here, but 58 or 56.9% of the pharmacists agreed with that statement. So great to see that the pharmacists are confident and they believe they have the knowledge as well. So in another portion of the questionnaire, really getting into what do they know. So I asked about what resources do you provide to patients about their diabetes education or management, and also how to use their diabetes therapy. So that included oral medications, injectable products, and glucose monitoring system. So the most common resources reported by greater than 50% of the pharmacists were written information and providing instructions to the caregiver. Similar percentage was seen with just general drug information, so information about side effects and about the medication itself. Approximately 50% of the pharmacists provided written or print leaflets to the patient. So I wanted to know, on the previous slide, we saw the confidence and the knowledge. However, looking at this slide, there seems to be a disconnect between self-perception and what pharmacists are actually doing in practice. So in addition to all of these questions about knowledge and self-perception, we asked the pharmacist, what resources would you like to have in the pharmacy to help you deliver care to these patients? So the pharmacist mentioned audio and verbal instructions, so interactive educational tools, audio-enabled prescription labels, audio-guided instructions, pre-recorded options. Additionally, availability of Braille and large print materials would also be helpful. And then lastly, technology solutions. So audible diabetes devices, electronic resources with voiceovers, text-to-speech technology, and I think there were some comments about centralized educational hubs. All right, and so this is the part that we have not completed yet in terms of looking at accessibility of diabetes medications, devices, and medication guides. But I do want to just quickly note, we had the preliminary data from 2022, 14 injectable products and 5 glucose monitoring systems that we looked at the time were not fully accessible. And the manufacturers advise to use the product with caution and or get help from a third party. Additionally, the medication guides of these products were not accessible using a screen reader. So I believe our next presenters will provide you with some insight on the progress made in this space related to diabetes medications and devices.
Thank you so much, Camry. Yeah, I love looking at these statistics and seeing that we have 56% of compliance or knowledge. And so there's still some work there to get to 100%.
Absolutely.
And so that's why Tom and Patricia and Veronica's work is so vital. So Tom is going to start out a little bit by telling us more about what fully accessible means.
Well, thank you, Charlotte, for the great introduction. Camry, great job. I was fascinated to see the statistic about confidence and knowledge, and the disconnect that you mentioned about actual implementation. So we're going to touch on some of that stuff in our presentation this afternoon. So because I think there is a disconnect there. Well, greetings, everyone. Great to be here. I'm just going to start with a little disclaimer. Unlike Cambry, neither Patricia, Veronica, nor I are medical professionals. So our presentation today is going to be based on information sharing solely. So if you hear about something in our presentation that captures your attention, we strongly encourage you to reach out to your medical team before making any changes to your diabetes management regimen. So again, we're the three of us, Patricia, Veronica, and I, are coming from this from an experiential perspective. So we are not medical professionals, and this is not medical advice. So the concept of something being fully accessible, or what we like to say universally designed, is a pretty simple idea, but it's not always implemented as it should be, as Cambry's data kind of indicated there. So I'm going to start by giving a really simple example. I'm sure we're all familiar with curb cuts, right? Very simple example on the sidewalk. You're walking down the street, you come to a corner, and you've got a curb cut, which is a slow, gradual gradation that takes you into the street, and then you can cross the street and go up the other curb cut on the other side. So for example, someone in a wheelchair, this is a great thing that happened under ADA and some other things where people traveling in a wheelchair could more easily cross the street with a curb cut versus trying to navigate over a curb, which I've seen people do, and it's not very pretty. So curb cuts have made life a lot easier for wheelchair users. But similarly, curb cuts are also great. For example, someone riding a bicycle, or perhaps more importantly, a mom pushing a baby stroller. So they can use those curb cuts to cross the street or get into the street, cross the street, and go up the other curb cut on the other side of the street. So the basic principle here is that curb cuts work for everybody. In a nutshell, that's basically the concept of universal design, is that things should work for all of us. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to start with what Patricia affectionately refers to as the less sophisticated technology, and Patricia and Veronica will get into the more fun toys out there in the market that work for those of us that don't see very well. So this is the same principle, universal design, can be applied to blood glucose meters, continuous glucose monitors, insulin pumps, and Patricia and Veronica are going to talk more about that. I'm going to talk about the glucose meters. We've all been in pharmacies where you've got just an abundance of choices, right? Tens, if not hundreds of different choices of blood glucose meters. But as Cambry's survey indicated and data indicated, as far as I'm aware, there's only really one fully accessible blood glucose meter, and that's the Prodigy Voice. And you'll see in a minute what I mean by fully accessible. The Prodigy Voice can be set up and used completely independently by someone who's blind or low vision. You don't need to have sight to set it up or use it. That's the beauty of it. So I'm going to start with a physical layout of the meter just to give you all kind of a concept for those of you who haven't seen it, and for maybe some of you who are in the audience today who are blind and have never seen a Prodigy Voice. It's about the size of a deck of cards, so in comparison to some of its predecessors that were a combination of a glucose meter and a talking attachment, it's much smaller. The front of the meter is contoured and curved, so it has a little curve in the front. At the 6 o'clock mark on the meter is a slot for the autocode test strip, and I'm not going to walk you through all the different aspects of conducting a test, but basically one of the things that I like about the Prodigy Voice is that when you stick the autocode test strip into the slot, it turns the meter on and it begins to talk you through, and I did say talk, not walk, but talk you through the whole blood sugar measuring process. So A to Z, obviously with the results at the end. Right above that slot are 3 buttons, and these are the buttons that control the Prodigy Voice. And from left to right, the repeat button is the first one on the left, and all these buttons are distinguishable tactily, so they all feel very different. But the repeat button is probably the button that makes the Prodigy Voice the preferred fully accessible blood glucose meter on the market, because it does exactly as it sounds like it does. So if you're conducting a blood sugar test and the results are being read and the phone rings or the dog barks or the doorbell rings and you're like, oh man, I didn't hear that. So beautiful button. You just push that button and it'll repeat the last spoken message from the Prodigy Voice. If we didn't have that, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? You'd have to do another finger stick, and who wants to do that, right? So the repeat button is a great feature on the Prodigy Voice, and I use it all the time when I'm using the Prodigy Voice. The next button to the right is the set button, and that does exactly what it sounds like it does. It gets you into the settings, and again, the settings menu is all totally accessible using the built-in speech, and you can navigate through it completely independently, set the meter up, do everything from the basics like setting the date and the time to all the different settings that the Prodigy Voice offers. I'm not going to get into all of them here, but they're all totally accessible. The third button on that level is the memory button. The memory button is kind of another cool button on this meter because you can get into the memory and you can use the arrow keys, which I'll mention in a second, to navigate through your blood sugar results one test at a time. Or you can actually use that memory button to get into the trending cycle. So you can get a 7, 14, 30, 60, and 90-day average reading. So if you're trying to track your blood sugars and get a trend for how they're doing, this meter lets you do that. So you can kind of compare, 1 week to 3 months and compare that to, for example, how your A1C blood test comes back from the doctor's office. Pretty useful tool. Above the 3 buttons is actually a display. This meter can be used by people who can see or to provide sighted assistance. Not that it's needed, but it's there. And to the right of that are the arrow keys I mentioned, up arrow and down arrow. And those keys are just used to help you navigate. For example, if you're in the memory, to navigate the memory results, and or while you're in the setup menu to change different settings in the setup menu. Again, all completely done independently without any sighted assistance whatsoever. Going down the right side of the meter, if you just kind of trail your finger down to the 5 o'clock position, is an actual 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. So for example, if you're on a plane or you're in a restaurant, hotel, and you want to conduct a blood glucose test privately, you can do that. When you have the headphones in, the external speaker does not speak. So I don't know about you guys, but I know in a public space, I don't want to broadcast my blood sugars to the world. So it's nice to have a way to do that. And on the other side of the meter, going down the left side, is another port, and that's to connect the Prodigy Voice to your PC. And in theory, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second, in theory, you can download your blood sugar readings to the Prodigy Voice software, print your results out, then give them to your doctor for them to review. I have to say personally, I've never really had good experience using the Prodigy Voice software. I never got it to work. I was never able to print my blood sugar results out. So for me anyway, that was a big limitation to the Prodigy Voice. But other than that, and all the other functions and features I could do completely independently. If you flip the meter over, you've got a battery compartment, and it has a little slot where you can stick your fingernail into it and just pop it open, and it actually uses 2 AAA batteries, and they last a long time. So it's a pretty energy efficient glucose meter from what I can tell. Here's a disclaimer that I want to mention here because there's a lot of confusion about this. Now, Prodigy has basically 3 meters in their family of blood glucose meters. The Prodigy Voice, the next one is the Prodigy Auto Code. Now, this particular glucose meter is prescribed a lot by physicians and pharmacists and other people because they think it's fully accessible when it's actually not. In fact, my doctor inadvertently prescribed my first one to me, and I'm like, no, this isn't the right meter. While it will talk you through a blood sugar test like the Prodigy Voice, and I'll read you the results. In the earlier example, if the phone rings or the dog barks or the front door rings, there's no repeat button and there's no way to access the memory. So in that sense, it is not a fully accessible blood glucose meter and really not completely usable by someone who's blind or low vision with independence. And there's a Prodigy Pocket out there, and that's not accessible at all, but it's a cute little meter, but it doesn't work for blind people at all. So that's kind of an overview of the Prodigy Voice. If you want more information, you can check out their website. Real simple website. It's Prodigy Meter, PRODIGY Meter, METER.com. And I also, just for fun, before this presentation, I did a Google search on Amazon, and I found you can get a Prodigy Voice starter kit for about 50 to 55 bucks. So it's a pretty affordable meter. You don't actually have to have a prescription to get it. You can actually go on Amazon and buy it. So I want to finish by talking briefly about insulin pens. Again, as we'll be talking more about here in a few minutes with Patricia and Veronica, The first thing you'll see when you open a box of insulin pens is a piece of paper, and the piece of paper says that these pens are not to be used by people who are blind or low vision. That's the disclaimer. And that's about what I think of that. And my colleagues are going to talk more about that in a second, as I mentioned. But I'm on multiple daily injections. My colleagues are on insulin pumps. I was on a pump for 23 years, but went off a few years ago, and have had success using multiple daily injections. So I can tell you, as someone who does multiple daily injections every day, that they're totally and completely doable by someone who's blind or low vision. And the way we can do that is when you're dialing a dose of insulin up, the knob, as you're turning it, both clicks. So you get an audible click, and you also get a tactile click when you're turning the knob. So it's dual sensory input. And Patricia put this in some of our notes, that you're getting two sensory inputs. So you can feel the clicks and you can hear the clicks. I don't know how you get much more accessible than that, guys, but that's pretty accessible from where I stand. So I'm going to touch briefly on the InPen. I don't know how many of you are aware of the InPen, IN-PEN. It's made by Medtronic, or whatever their new name of their new diabetes division is called. I think it's called MiniMed. But the InPen is a smart pen, and it's a smart pen which requires a smartphone. So if you don't have a smartphone, you can't use a smart pen. That's supposed to be a joke. Anyway, so the InPen is something that's supposed to help you be smarter about manage your diabetes. So it can help you, for example, calculate the number of carbs. So again, the app for the InPen is on your phone. That's why you have to have a smartphone. So the app on the phone allows you to calculate kind of like you would do using an insulin pump, like how many carbs you're going to have, and the pen can kind of tell you through the app what your bolus should be, how much insulin you should take for that particular amount of carbs and all that stuff. My colleagues are better versed in that than I am, but that's how it works. And the other thing, which really blows my mind, is that you can also set reminders so you don't forget to take your insulin. I forget to take your insulin, guys, but I hear it's a prevalent thing with people forgetting to bolus at a meal or things like that. So you can actually use this to remind you to take your insulin. It's a reusable pen, so it does have replacement insulin cartridges. So I'm not exactly sure how long the pen itself lasts, but it lasts for a while. So you can buy individual replacement insulin cartridges, which they do need to be refrigerated when they're not being used, just like regular insulin in a vial or insulin pens. But when they're in use, you can leave it at room temperature and everything's fine. So that's what I know about InPens. So Charlotte, I'm going to stop there, and
Tom, we have one question that is apropos to what you're talking about right now, and that
whatever
is
you want to do. You want to take it now?
when you're using a pen, how do you prime that when you can't see it? Do you feel for the insulin coming out, or how do you do that?
Great question. So keep in mind that there are different types of pens. I happen to use 3 different types of pens. One of them is what they call the Humalog Junior Quick Pen. So that's a half unit dose. So every time you turn the knob, it's a half unit. So generally speaking, to prime a new disposable needle, it's 2 units. And sometimes it takes more and sometimes less. But there's 2 ways you can do it. And there's a technique that we've been using for years. It's a tried and true test. So you can actually turn the knob 2 units to dial up 2 units, and then spray the insulin on the back of your hand. You can feel it on the back of your hand. It's generally cold. And then, as I think your question stated, you can actually smell the insulin as well. So I use both. I use both the tactile feeling of having the insulin hit my back of my hand, which is a very sensitive part of your hand. And then I can also smell the insulin that's on my hand, so I know it's been primed. And I will say this, because I learned this the hard way too, that even though the literature says you should put a brand new pen on every time you use an insulin pen, and you should prime it every time, whether or not you put on a new disposable needle every time is irrelevant. But the fact is, you do not need to prime it every time you put a new needle on. I found out I was wasting a lot of insulin. Now, the only time you need to prime is when you open up a new pen and you prime it for that first time. That's the only time you need to prime it. And that's not what the literature says. So I'm going against the grain here, but that's how it works. And I didn't know that and figured it out finally with some friends' help. So it's both through touch and smell. Again, you can figure out when you've primed the pen properly, but that's a great question.
All right, thank you so much. And so fully accessible, we're talking about being able to do everything yourself, getting into the settings, setting it up, etc. So thank you for providing us with that definition and some examples there.
Sure.
Now we're going to go to Veronica, and she's going to talk about some of the potential barriers to using a CGM and pump devices, but also hopefully some successful tips there too. So if you want to unmute Veronica, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon or morning if you're where I am. I'm Veronica, and I am one of the people who was diagnosed as an adult, but I really confounded the system a little bit. And this was a little bit important because at that time, one of the biggest things that we faced and still face are related to attitudes. What I started with is, oh my God, she's blind. She must be late stage diabetes complications. She's not in good control. She doesn't care. So we're not going to give her much information because it won't matter. She'll be dead within 7 years. That's what I was told in 1988. It's come a long way. And this is one place where all of you, with your patients, can really make a big time change in the world, is this particular attitude, because my blindness wasn't related to my diabetes at all. I was born premature, and there are a whole bunch of us that are in our 60s, 70s, who fit this category. And now a lot of these people are becoming your type 2 patients. So understand there are a whole lot of causes for blindness now. One of them is diabetes. So always assume that your patient wants to be in good control, or they probably wouldn't be talking to you. And I think the most important thing you can take from this segment, as I go through all the fun stuff, is let the customer define their barriers. Something that's a barrier for one person may not be for another. And I'll give you a couple examples of that one. But let your customer define the barriers. That is the most important thing. So what happens? You meet someone and the first thing that might go through your head is, oh, geez, I've never had any experience with a blind person before. What do I do? So it's very natural. You go to the company's website. Let's look at this insulin pump. My person is debating between the Mobi and the Omnipod. And what do you find on the website? Patients should not use this pump if they cannot see the screen or hear the alerts. Oops. How many people do you think go to a blind person and say, well, you can't have this pump because the company says so? And you're looking at a few people that went, ha, ha. I've been using various insulin pumps since 1991. When I first started, the companies try to require that we had a sighted person living with us. I'm really proud to say we got rid of that one pretty quickly and continued to advocate right up till today. Unfortunately, with this disclaimer that's on the websites, that's the thing that the FDA put there. So that's a little more work to get the FDA to get rid of, but it's out of date because let's take my Omnipod. I'm using the Omnipod 5 in automated mode now, and I'm using it with the Dexcom G7. So what controls this pump? Where's the pump screen? Let's see, my pump here, I'm pointing to the pod on my left arm. It's covered up by my long sleeve top. Nothing to see on it. You fill it up with insulin, slap it on. It talks via Bluetooth to the app on my phone. And phones come with screen reading software. In the case of the iPhone, it's built in. It's called VoiceOver. All your phones have it. In the case of Android phones, we install TalkBack. Okay, so our phones already talk to us. Pump screen, there isn't one. So that is definitely out of date. And this is what is beginning to allow us access to the latest and greatest fun toys. So most of us, you're looking at the crew that ignores that. And there's nothing that we have to prove with the companies. If you do it, you do it. And what's really important for you to understand is that we are as diverse a group as your sighted customers. Some of us love technology. Some of us cuss and fuss at it and use it anyway. And some of us go, God, this is too much. I'm done. I don't like tubing. And we deserve the same chances as everyone else to try it and go, nope. Or try it and maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe somebody doesn't pay enough attention to the details that you have to pay attention to. And that can happen to any of your customers. So same chances to try and fail, try and quit, try and succeed. The other part of the attitude that is just as important is, let's say your first person is one of us who goes, I'm going to make this work no matter what. Ooh, let's try this. And I get it done. And now patient number 2 comes along who happens to be blind. Oh, I have so-and-so who's a blind person, and by golly, she's the best blind person I've ever had, and the best pump user in the whole world, so you guys are really great. Suppose your next patient isn't. Please, please never use success from somebody like me to punish another blind person living with diabetes. Again, we are all different, and it's really, really important to let us be individuals. So I'll tell you a little bit about what's required of us. Again, most of these things have smartphones, so you got to have a smartphone. I don't need to tell you, smartphones are getting more and more expensive every day. And so hopefully, I'd like to see a system where when a phone is a medical device, insurance covers it, but they haven't asked me yet. So, and then really, in order to work these, the patient needs familiarity with the screen reader, with voiceover. If your patient doesn't know voiceover, it's going to be hard to go through the apps and learn the things that they have to learn to be able to manage it. If your patient doesn't know voiceover, see if you can help that person figure out where to learn it. Look for a local agency that serves the blind. You can look for organizations on the internet. We have email lists that you can put people in touch with and say, learn voiceover, get really comfortable. Because you do have to do some workarounds, and we're still a little bit in the Wild West because we're the early days. So I'm sitting here in the Dexcom app, and I'm on the connections page. So this is where it shows you your sensor and
Profile tab for _sensor _details _nav title _label connections heading.
got that? What the heck was that?
_sensor session image.
So this is unlabeled buttons. And some of us are brave enough to go, gibberty, what in the heck was that? I'm going to push it and see what happens. Not everybody's quite that brave or stupid, but they're not wrong. I'm going to be more careful. And so we have to kind of learn when you hear ICO _radio inactive, oh, that's the button that you push if you want to enter a calibration. Really? So that's one of the things that our Accessible Insulin Pump Task Force is working with these companies and saying things like, please label your buttons. It would make our life a whole lot easier because your sighted customers wouldn't put up with stuff like that. But it does give us access. And once we can learn, oh, it sounds a little weird, but you go there. So that's where the familiarity with voiceover. And then the other issue that we have, everybody does to a certain extent, is sometimes we live in terror of the inevitable updates. Because since the accessibility of insulin pumps isn't so widely tested, very often somebody will roll out an update, whether it's Apple or Dexcom or whatever your company is, and they're going to break something. And that just happened with Dexcom, and that was what I was just showing you a little bit. That button spoke in the last version. Why did they break it now? And so that's when we get on the email list and share, hey, they busted this in the update because it can affect voiceover, and maybe they didn't test it. So you have to be just a little bit brave to do these things and decide whether you want to be that brave. And on the hardware side, again, it's a little bit of extra time, a little bit of extra learning. When I started on the Omnipod in 2018 with one of the older classic models, one of the most complicated things for me was getting the pod placed properly. And during my original training session, they said, oh, just reach over your arm. Okay, so I'm taking my right hand and reaching across to the top of my left arm and then reaching behind it and put the pod there. Okay, now they want the pod on the back of your arm and they want it straight, and the tape sticks out a bit. So you have to make sure you don't touch the edge of that tape to your arm, or what happens? You've wrinkled your tape. And for a year, I spent reaching around, and then I'm like, oh, bleepity bleep, I wrinkled that darn tape again. I have to tell you quite honestly, I cried a lot my first 6 months because I was trying so hard. I was doing it all by myself. And at that point, I was still counting buttons when I used they call it their personal diabetes manager. It's the remote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So, but I did. I cried a lot in the first 6 months, but I kept going. Finally, my brain kicked in and I went, reach underneath my arm. Then I could position my hand better and know a little bit better about where I land when I went slap very quickly without touching the tape. And I haven't wrinkled a piece of tape in years because I finally figured out a slightly different method. Now, filling the pod with insulin, they give you a syringe that you stick in the insulin vial and you fill the syringe and then you put the syringe in the pod. Well, putting the syringe in the pod is easy. It's a great big hole. You can find it. You stick the syringe in, but you do have to fill the syringe. So what happens there? You've already heard from Tom, hey, we can use insulin pens. And a bunch of it went, well, I don't need to use their syringe. I can use my pen. Now, I actually use a pen, connect it to the syringe, and fill the syringe using the insulin pen so I can count the clicks. So there are good, easy workarounds that we can use. And we just have to learn them. We just have to take a little bit of time to do it and talk to each other and help each other. This is why we have email lists. So sometimes, Veronica, how did you do that stupid pod? And I can help out and we can give each other clues. And it's been really useful with today's technology. So, you can say to somebody who's getting frustrated, well, God, I remember Veronica said she had trouble getting that tape not wrinkled when she was first putting pods on. So you're not alone. And that's really important. Some people may struggle with one thing about their phone. Tom has no trouble with Face ID. I hate it. I finally kind of changed how I did it. But I'm willing to get past the frustration because I want the results. So again, let the customer define the barriers. Let your customer try, help find resources, and then pay attention to what you can learn when you're training the customer. And that is what Patricia's going to talk about.
Thank you so much, Veronica. I just want to put in there too that um like my son was diagnosed when he was 3, so he's had a learning curve as well, because obviously you can't do it, hardly any of it, managing it yourself when you're 3. But then, as he's skilling up, he can do more and more himself. And I think that's kind of the same if you're newly visually impaired. You're going to have to learn certain skills before you can utilize some of these, but there's no reason why you can't master them with some practice. And I don't know anybody who gets diagnosed with diabetes who doesn't cry for the first 6 months, because it's a huge change to the way you live your life. So, Patricia, you want to take it from there?
Yes, yes. So let me start out by, let me clarify too. You introduced me as a dietitian and diabetes educator, which I was, but I'm retired. I've been retired for a number of years, which gives me more time to do all this wonderful volunteer work where I think we're making a difference in the world. But let me start off with explaining the devices that I use very, very quickly, and we can talk about them more in the Q&A. But I use a Tandem Mobi insulin pump along with a Dexcom G7. And I find that these two devices are totally accessible to me to use entirely independently as a blind person. I also, if I do need to do a finger stick, I kind of use a quirky little meter called the Contour Next One, because I find it to be really accurate. Its accessibility is a little less there, but it reads out the blood glucose on an app on the phone. And as Veronica was explaining, and Tom explained, that voiceover on our phones read that aloud. And that's the only information I really need from that app. A lot of the rest of the app is really kind of inaccessible. But once I pair it with that app, I only have to repair it every time I buy a new phone, which for me is about every 5 or 6 years. So those are the devices that I use. I'm going to kind of talk about two major things. The first one we call blindness etiquette, especially if you haven't been accustomed to training people who are blind. And the second is just some helpful tips in terms of training and teaching. So I'll give you some examples of that. So as far as blindness etiquette, number one, it's important for you to try and be comfortable with the patient. I know that if you haven't been used to being around blind people, you may feel a little uncomfortable, like you don't know what to say, you don't know what to do. And don't worry about that. In fact, even go ahead and express that to the patient if that's the way you feel, and to say to them, gee, I just might need some help, from you on your end, because I haven't worked with a lot of blind people. We'll totally understand. Keep in mind that we're just everyday, ordinary people who can't see. Otherwise, we're totally the same as everybody else. Just like we're diabetics, but otherwise we're just the same as any other ordinary person. So keep that in mind. It's important for you to respect the person and don't assume anything. There's a lot of misconceptions about blind people. Blind people do things this way, they do it that way, or they are able to do these things, or as was mentioned twice before, we can't use insulin pumps, we can't use insulin pens. Don't make those kinds of assumptions, because as Veronica mentioned, we're all individuals, just like sighted people are. There's many different degrees of blindness. So again, it's often a misconception that blindness refers to somebody who's totally blind, doesn't even see any light, no images, nothing. And actually blindness starts legally at a 2200 acuity vision and goes all the way up to total blindness. So as you can see, you're going to find varying levels of abilities, because some people do have a fair amount of vision left and they're still considered legally blind. Now, when you do approach your patient, you want to introduce yourself, because although you may be wearing a name tag, they're not going to be able to see it. So introduce yourself by name, and then, what position you hold, so that they know if you're the pharmacist or the diabetes educator or the nurse or whoever you are. And if you're the person that's going to be doing the training with them that day. If you do need to step away from your conversation with the person at any time during the day, be sure and let the person know. There's nothing we hate more than talking to thin air. And it is so embarrassing when you're talking along here and you have no idea if the person left 2 seconds ago, or if you've been talking to thin air for 5 minutes. It's important for you, even though you know that the person may not be able to make eye contact with you like a sighted person, it's still important to face the person directly. It's going to be better communications. Everybody's going to be able to hear better. So that's a good way to approach it. Now, probably some of your patients bring along a companion, maybe a spouse or a family member or whatever, but don't address the patient through the family member. It drives me crazy if occasionally I go to a medical office or the lab and they'll say to my husband, who drives me, are you going to sign for her, or can she sign her name? Well, I'm right here and I can hear you and you can ask me, and yes, we can sign our names. And mine actually looks pretty darn good, they say. Other of your patients may bring along a guide dog. They may not bring a companion, but they may have a guide dog. And I know these guide dogs are very beautiful and you really want to pet them, but do not interact with the guide dog. The dog is there to work and to help guide its owner and keep its owner safe. So don't interact. It can distract the dog. Now, the next thing you're probably going to want to do is escort the person to the location where you're going to be doing the training. So by this time you've met the person, you probably have a clear idea on maybe their mobility skills. If they come in with a guide dog or they come in with a white cane, and we call it a white cane, it's not a stick. People are always calling my white cane a stick. It's officially called a white cane for the blind. Then you're probably pretty sure that this person has fairly good mobility skills and they're just going to follow you down the hall to wherever you're going to take them to do the training. If the person looks a little unsure, then they probably are. And so you can ask if you can assist them to the room. And at that point, the proper procedure is for them to take your right arm with their left hand above the elbow, and they'll stand about a half a step behind you. And then you'll be in the lead going to wherever you need to go, and they can just follow along very easily. Optionally, they might choose to put their left hand just gently on top of your right shoulder, and they can easily follow you down the hall that way. By all means, do not take the person by the arm and guide them that way by dragging them or pushing them down. It's not very efficient and it's really rather demeaning. It's better if they take your arm. It's important for you to respect people's physical boundaries. Do not touch the person unless you ask permission, and that's very important. And lastly, it's important to focus on the goal and the teaching and why the patient is there that day and not the disability. I mean, you need to address maybe just a few of these issues regarding their vision loss, but other than that, really try and focus on the goal of why they're there. Now, let's talk a little bit about some techniques you might use during the actual training process. I think it would be great to start off with just asking them kind of what their goals are for coming that day and what questions that they would like to start off with, because that'll give you a pretty good idea of maybe the direction you need to take with the training. Like Veronica was saying, some people are going to take to this technology or these devices very easily. Others are going to be very worried about being able to do it and so forth. And by having this initial chat, you're going to get an idea of what the person's personal goals are, because we're all individuals. Try and be very positive and assume that this person is going to be able to successfully learn how to use this device. It's always better to look at things, glass half full rather than glass half empty. It may not always be that they're going to be able to learn or that they're going to want to, but they need the chance to try, and your positive attitude could really make all the difference in the world. I like to do an audio recording of trainings if they're going to be rather complicated. My brain seems to work a little more slowly as I age, and trying to remember step after step after step of some new thing I'm trying to learn is really very difficult. And I find if I've got this audio recording, I can easily go back and listen to it as many times as I need, or during the process at home. So people may bring some device to do that. It's really important that you schedule extra time for this person. And we hope that you're forewarned that you're going to be meeting with a blind patient. That may not always be the case, and that's always very unfortunate. But it's simply going to take longer to teach a blind person to use an insulin pump than it is a sighted person. I mean, there's no fact more evident than that. It's important if you can provide follow-up visits with the person, and if that's not necessary, or if that's not possible, then direct them to other healthcare professionals of the community where they could follow up if they need to go over the information again. And also feel free to, connect them up with peer support groups like the many that Veronica, Tom, and I belong to. We belong to a number of groups where people compare notes. We share with each other, like, well, this worked for me, and then we just give each other moral support because, as Charlotte was saying, a diagnosis of diabetes in the beginning, there's just so much to learn, and it's really rather terrifying. Now, when you're actually teaching the person to use the device, make sure that they get to touch and feel every component. Don't be holding it in your hands and saying, well, you do this and you do that and you do that. I had a friend who apparently was recently trained on how to use the Mobi insulin pump that way. She called me when it was time for her 3-day sight change, and she says, help, please come. And so she says, I don't know how to do this. The person who trained me showed me how, and she had a little vision, but it wasn't the same as her having been able to do it herself at the appointment. So that's what I let her do. I let her do it, and I talked her through it. Be very verbally as descriptive as possible. So like, don't say things like, this is the red button and that's the blue lever, and you pull up on this and you pull down on that. You really need to use very specific words and helping the person to place their fingers and their hands on those components as you talk about it. A couple of words that we really hate, and those are this and there. You pull this over here and then you grab down on that over there. And as you can imagine, that means nothing to someone who is blind. Now, one thing that really helped me, and if you can help your patients to do it, is to have either extra devices or extra components of them. Like with my Mobi pump, I got some extra cartridges and infusion sets given to me that I could practice on. I was actually even given a dummy pump that didn't have the electronics in it, because I had a heck of a time at first putting that cartridge on and taking it off. And, after practicing that for a few days and practicing with all the equipment, I felt really confident. And it was great to have those extras around the house to play with. Now, you may sometimes provide your patients with written resources, as the surveys indicated. Pharmacists apparently send people home with written directions, which may and may not do a blind person a bit of good, depending on if they've got some really expensive, fancy equipment at home that might be able to read it. So again, person may need some large print instructions, Braille, or in the case of myself and a lot of people I know, that if you can send like instructions in a Word document to my email, I can open that up on my computer or my smart devices, and then my screen reader, my voiceover, or my screen reader on my computer will read that aloud to me. So those are some optional ways to give people resources to use at home. And lastly, you're probably going to have to think outside the box sometimes to come up with techniques that would allow the person to use these devices completely independently. And Veronica shared several things that she does. I'll share a couple more that I use. Like, for example, in filling my cartridge for my Mobi pump, I'm supposed to look and see if there's labels in it. It's clear. You can see right through it, right? Well, not for me, but I need to get those bubbles out just the same. So what I do is usually completely fill the cartridge as much as 3, 4, 5 times, and then put all the insulin back into the vial of insulin. And I can hear those bubbles when they bubble back into the vial. When I no longer hear that bubbling, then I know that I can do my last draw and that there will be no bubbles in the cartridge. Another thing then that I have to do after that is to run insulin through the tubing until there's drops that come out the end, just like we were talking about priming an insulin pen. Well, what I do is hold the infusion set with the needle facing down over the palm of my hand, and I can feel those drops drop right into the palm of my hand, and you can stop it right after that first or second drop. So those are a couple of the techniques that I use that allow me to complete the process without any sighted assistance. So those are just a few tips on how you might approach your patient and how you might teach them. And with that, I will stop, and there'll be time in Q&A. I'll be glad to answer any questions. So Charla?
Yeah, and I'm gonna share the list of accessible devices that you provided me with. So this list lists for blood glucose meters, the Prodigy Voice. For continuous glucose monitors, the Abbott Freestyle Libre with the phone app, the Dexcom G6 and G7 with the phone app, because again, the device they provide you with, the controller they provide you with, isn't always accessible, but the apps with voiceover will work. The Medtronic InPen for insulin delivery, and then for pumps, the Tandem Mobi and the Insulet Omnipod 5. So those are the ones this team has recommended the most, that you can pretty much do everything yourself. Thank you so much, everyone, for all that information. I think that's going to be really useful information for pharmacists. And it looks like in our chat, we have a lot of rehab therapists in attendance saying that they can also help train people. So, if you're a pharmacist and you feel like, maybe your patient needs a little bit more work, vision rehabilitation therapy might be the key for your patient to get the extra training that they need. And I'm going to talk now about language access, because we talked about in our webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about language barriers. So when it comes to language access barriers, a lot of times we talk about limited English proficiency. And I just want to clarify that limited English proficiency is not necessarily someone who doesn't know any English. In fact, a lot of times people with limited English proficiency are very conversational in English. However, when it comes to navigating medical information, they're going to really want it in their native tongue because that's medical jargon. That's medical information that they probably didn't learn that vocabulary in English. And so having it in their native language is going to be really important. And so asking patients if they need this is significant. So there's some things that you can do even before your patient arrives to help promote language access and to overcome language barriers. The first of that is store signage in multiple languages. And having a sign or I speak cards available. So an I speak card is a small, like, like a business card, and it just says, I speak this language. And they can show that to the pharmacist. And so when you want to use the language interpreter line, if someone just starts speaking to you in another language, you might not know what language they're speaking. So that card can give you some idea on what language they need an interpreter for. But you can also have a sign where they can point to the language that they speak. So an I speak sign. And so that's another thing that you can do before they even arrive to make that interaction easier. And then also know how to use your interpreter services. So most pharmacies do have access to interpreter services. It's usually a language phone line or a service through an iPad. And you should know how to do that. And you should have everybody on your team practice, especially your pharmacy techs, because they're probably the one that's going to start the interaction. And then you'll finish the interaction with counter counseling. So making sure everybody knows how to do that. Everybody knows where the iPad is at or where the language line phone number is at. Everybody's tried it out a couple of times. So they're not figuring it out during that. What should be a 5 or 10-minute interaction doesn't become a 25-minute interaction. And then another way that you can prepare ahead of time is with your EMR records. So putting in a patient's language preference or communication needs. So for example, if they're blind or visually impaired, put in they need Braille, they need a script talk label, they need large print. Put in, they speak Spanish, they speak Portuguese, whatever. And then when it comes to EMRs, also making sure that your system handles surnames properly. If you grow up in Spain, they require you by law to have 2 surnames. And so let's make sure that our EMR records take those kinds of cultural things into account so that, you're not looking up one name and not the other name. And so that's all accounted for. And knowing that a physician might use just one of the names because they also are not always using both names, and making sure that records don't get lost and so forth because of that. So we can do all that, within the EMR. Maybe you can even schedule or have your EMR do a pop-up saying this is a visually impaired patient or this is a patient that needs a language interpreter, so that as soon as you start to fill, that when this patient comes in, that's a service that they're going to need. When they're at the pharmacy counter, again, that pop-up can be very helpful. And then, as I already said before, practice using your interpreter services or your iPad or your technology so that you know that it's working. I think it was Veronica who said, oh, they did an update and then it didn't work right. And so, if you are using it and practicing it frequently, then you'll know when there's technology glitches or something, the iPad needs to be charged or whatever. Just make that part of your schedule. You can also have on hand translated visual aids. So if you very commonly are talking to people, counseling them, you could have a translated visual aid and point to different already translated common instructions like this will make you drowsy, or take with food, or take at bedtime, etc. You could have those pre-translated on a sheet and be able to point to them if your language interpreter line is not functioning properly. And then also, especially when you're doing like diabetes education, utilizing the teach back method is very vital. If you haven't heard about this, this is where you ask the patient to basically repeat back to you what you told them. Now, you don't want it to be verbatim, so it might look something like, oh, so I want to make sure that I explained it correctly. When you get home, how are you going to take this medication? So then they can put it into their own words, and then you can clarify if there's something that might be missing there. And then again, for things to take home, first and foremost, I'm going to recommend translated prescription labels. Obviously, that's what Scriptability and Vision America is all about, is audible and large print braille prescription labels. Our audible labels are available in 18 different languages, and our large print labels are available in up to 50 languages. So we recommend, translations, whether you're using ours or a different translation, you have it on the container, dual language, so you preserve the original label and you add additional information so that the English and the preferred language are there. And then AI generated translations as of July 1st need to be verified. Now, you might interpret that regulation a little bit differently than we do. The regulation in section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act says that vital health information needs to be provided verified through a human interpreter or translator if it was generated by AI. So, I mean, I think medication information is a vital health information. Your health system might interpret that differently, but better safe than sorry. And our software does allow you to do that. Also, medication guides, if you're providing these, you're going to want to provide them in translation. Depending on the drug class, many manufacturers are required by law to provide translations, and they'll have those on their website. And then instruction materials, like Veronica said, sometimes it's better if somebody gets information emailed to them, then they can review it and refer to it again later. And this is no different for those who speak another language. If you can send a translation to their email, that's a really great way where they can review it later. And if you're visually impaired and have a language barrier, obviously having that information translated and emailed to them will provide them with the most accessibility to all those critical information for managing diabetes. This is just a little view of what our solutions are. The Script Talk station can read the audible labels out loud, but you can also use the phone to read them, and each phone has different languages already pre-enabled, so it's going to be kind of limited by what your phone does. And then in our large print labels are the ones that have up to 50 different languages available through our software. As far as diabetes devices, I tried to look this up a little bit to see which ones offered multiple languages, and it wasn't very encouraging. But the Freestyle Libre Link app, again, is limited by what languages your phone offers, but they have up to 20 languages. If this particular language isn't supported by your phone, then it will default back to English. So Arabic, Chinese, Danish, Dutch, English, Finnish, French, German, Greek, Hebrew, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Norwegian, Polish, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, Swedish, and Turkish. So that's a nice assortment of languages with the Freestyle Libre Link app. Medtronic was English, Spanish, and simplified Chinese. Omnipod and Dexcom, unfortunately, English and Spanish only in the United States. If you are in another country, they have more options, but in the United States, those are their only two options. The Prodigy Autocode and the Prodigy Voice have Spanish, English, French, and Arabic, supposedly. The information online was not always the same where you looked, but potentially there's 4 different languages for them. And then tandem is English and Spanish. Again, unless you got a device from another country, there are other device languages available in other countries. So you might have a patient who came from another country whose device has other languages enabled. And I did find 3 really beautiful websites that had information about diabetes in multiple languages. Probably the most comprehensive one was the Diabetes Essentials, available in 26 languages on the ndss.com.au website, which is an Australian diabetes group. And I think it's a state-sponsored diabetes services. And so they had 26 different languages and videos. So, if you are blind or visually impaired, those videos, you can listen to them, and they're in all these different languages. Beyond Type 1, which has information about Type 1 and Type 2 on their website, just launched recently websites in Dutch, French, German, Italian, and Swedish. So that's a nice extension to their English website that, you might be able to use like Google Translate or something on, but these websites are particular to those languages and fully in that language. And then digibidi.org, which was a very beautiful website with lots of information. They have actual tech guides in video format for CGMs and pumps, as well as videos on just the essentials of diabetes. What is diabetes? How do you manage it, etc. And so that was at digibidi.org/essentials. So I would really recommend these 3 websites as a really great resource for your patients if they need information about diabetes and the CGM and pumps in another language. And then finally, I just want to finish up with a little bit about healthcare navigating. I know a lot of the rehab therapists and pharmacists already do some assistance in healthcare navigating, but I just want to reiterate that those who are blind or visually impaired or have a language access barrier are in more need of some assistance navigating the healthcare system, because a lot of the system is not set up for them to navigate. And I found one statistic that people with language barriers are 42% less likely to prescribe a CGM, even if they fall into the medical criteria for one. And so the studies don't say why, but I think we can guess why. People assume that they're not available in a particular language, or they can't learn to navigate the buttons and so forth. And so I really like Patricia's idea of skilling up. Maybe your patient just needs to learn some basic English vocabulary that's on the CGM. Maybe they need to learn voiceover or whatever, so that if that's the vocabulary they learn, then they can actually use the CGM a little bit faster than learning all of English, etc. I also found that people with a disability or who are non-white or have language barriers are more likely to be their claim appeal to be denied. That's just a discouraging thing, but we can help as much as we can on navigating the insurance system as well, and do what we can so that their appeals are not denied a second time. And then a few people already mentioned it, but social determinants of health, like lack of transportation, limited insurance, limited job opportunities, limited time off work to go pick up their prescriptions, limited support systems. If you're a newcomer, you really don't have a strong community around you yet. You might not have caregivers. So all those kinds of social determinants of health can make a big difference on the likelihood and the amount of support that people have in managing their diabetes. And so it's not always just about, making sure they have the right meds, but making sure that they have everything that they need to be able to get refills and to continue to use some of this tech that makes managing diabetes so much easier. So that's kind of a brief overview of some of the language access things. But obviously I'm going to just really say that translated prescription labels is probably the best way to go because that's what people get to take home. And I know for my prescriptions and my son's diabetes information, I've read it over and over again many times, and having it in the language that you can actually understand is going to be so critical. So now it's time for our Q&A. I do want to put this up here real quick, our speaker contact information before we head into the QA, if anybody wanted to write that down. So we did get the chat started again, and we had a few questions in the Q&A, so I want to go through those. Now, somebody asked, how do you find the hole to put the insulin for the Omnipod 5? And I think, Veronica, you said, one of you said, you can use your pen, but how do you find the hole?
You clean your hands really good and you put your hand on the pod and touch it. Sometimes we just have to be a little bit braver, just like when you finish the whole process of filling the pod, and the last thing it does is it automatically inserts the cannula and it asks you to look and go, is the cannula properly inserted? Well, there's no way I can look, so I lie every time. Yeah, sure. I'll find out because if it's not inserted properly, insulin will go everywhere. So sometimes we just have to do that. I know somebody who figured out a way to use the tandem T-Slim pump, and she always kept like an extra alcohol swab around and just alcoholed her hand before she touched a spot when she had to look at it. But one of the things that we've done who touch things so many times is we've learned how to touch things very delicately. So I can kind of touch the paper backing the edges of the hole without sticking my finger in the hole. So I haven't compromised sterility of anything. It's easy to find. What's hard to find is the little hole you have to stick a pin in if there's a pod failure and it's screaming at you.
That's the
You're
worst.
sitting there looking for the stupid little hole, and oh boy. But it's big, it's in the lower right corner. That one's easy.
One time I found a pot outside in my patio, and I was like, why is there like a pot out here on the patio? My son's like, I couldn't find the hole. I just
Yeah.
threw it outside.
Yeah. They always tell you put them in the freezer, but that never worked. I just went by my refrigerator hearing. So my husband made me a little device that fits in there. And so I just have this little device with me that I can just stick in and go, shut up. Because that thing goes off in the wrong place. They'll think you're a terrorist.
A thumbtack works pretty good too.
Yeah. Yep. And
Thank you. All right, just a few comments that people made in the Q&A. So we already talked a little bit about vision rehab therapy. So there you can go to acvrep.org to find a certified vision rehab therapist anywhere in the United States. And if a patient is a veteran, the veteran services have an entire team of blind vision rehab. So you can always refer them to that. And then somebody asked, when you say the manufacturers need to label the button, what do you mean? Okay, that one I know, but that's when you're using voiceover or any kind of like screen reader, the buttons like that you would click with your mouse or you would press with your finger on the screen of your phone, they all have a label or should have a label so that you know what it says. Like if you're sighted, you can see the button says mute all or invite. But sometimes when it comes to voiceover, they forgot to add the alt text or whatever. And so you have a button and voiceover doesn't know what the button does because they didn't
right.
put a label.
So and sometimes they'll have a picture. So you have a picture of a little pump or a picture of something, and then we need a way of saying identifying what that picture is instead of the word pump or whatever.
Yeah. And then the next question, could you share some more of Script Talk's functionality options for patient populations? So for Script Talk, this device, you have forward and backward, start and stop. You can adjust the voice speed. And the lowest voice speed is spell mode. So it goes letter by letter, like say you need a drug spelled out or something.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it has a headphone jack, and voice control, upper, lower, and upper voice. So this device is very simple. On the app, Script Talk has some additional features. My meds. So every time you scan something, it keeps track of the name of the med and everything. Just today, we added reminders. So
Yes.
now in the Script Talk mobile app, you can set a reminder for your medication and it will send you an alert to your home screen, even your lock screen, to remind you to take your medication. And you can say, I took it, I ignored it, or whatever. And then that is a really great, like if you're part of a program where you have to show your doctor that you actually took your meds, and you can export the information to your doctor. The app also has Find a Pharmacy. So no matter where you're at, you can use my location or enter in a zip code, and it'll tell you all the pharmacies in the area that have scriptability and which labels they offer. So it'll tell you whether they offer Script Talk or translation or large print labels, Braille, etc.
Oh.
So those are some of kind of the features of Script Talk. I mean, I can quickly do a talking label here, so that you can hear, now honestly, I don't know what language it is. French, maybe? Spanish?
Paciente, John Smith. Medicamento, amoxicillin 250
Sounds like
miligramos
Spanish.
tablet.
Mhm.
Instrucciones, tomar una cápsula por boca 3 veces al día. Cantidad, 30.
Pretty
Fecha
cool,
de
though.
despacho, enero 29, 2025.
And so it's
Fecha de
also the
caducidad, febrero
translation. You can
23,
see,
2026.
you can
Nice.
see the information on the screen written in that language as well as hear it. Obviously, if somebody doesn't want it to speak out loud, they can just see the information. So, and then again, there's like 18 different languages available for that.
Thought I saw some hands. Any hands?
Yeah, I just want to finish going through the actual
Oh.
Q&A here. How hard is it to change amounts of medicine that you need? Okay, this person, we might need more information to be able to answer their question.
Oh, okay. Hopefully I'm unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, awesome. All right. I'm actually thinking about my doctor's trying to talk me into going over to an insulin pump. So I'm at the point of how user friendly is it going to be for me, how user friendly it's going to be, how it's going to work for me, and which pumps are more accessible, I guess, and that kind of thing.
Okay, so changing the amounts of medicine, you mean like if you need to take more or less insulin?
Correct.
Yeah, I'm gonna just say from a parent's point of view, that is one of the beautiful things about the Omnipod, for example. So my son is 10, and of course he has recess and gym class and everything. And so we were able to work with our doctor and the school nurse, and his pump actually gives him more or less basal based upon the time of the school day, so that he doesn't go low for gym class and recess. And making sure he doesn't go low when he's walking home from school and stuff. So he gets a lot less basal during those time periods. And it just does it automatically. He doesn't even have to think about it. And then you can always give more bolus or corrective just by entering in the number of carbs that you wanted, or for a corrective, like you just see that you're going high, maybe because of anxiety or whatever, and you can just give yourself some more insulin to deal with that high. So
Yeah, Charlotte, I'd also comment, Jade, this is Tom, that some of these new automated insulin delivery systems where the continuous glucose meter talks to the pump. So it does automatically what Charlotte's saying you can do manually, as far as increasing your basal rate for a blood sugar that's rising or dropping. And of course, Patricia and Veronica know more about this, but keep that in mind too. But they should talk about which pumps we're using that are accessible.
And this is Veronica. You can also put your pumps in either they call them activity or exercise mode. So if you know you're getting ready to walk to work and it's going to take you 30 minutes to walk there, you can tell it how long to be in exercise mode, and that will prevent you from going low. So even that kind of thing can happen automatically,
Yeah.
and they can react automatically if you're going low. And sometimes you just pay attention. And every once in a while, if I'm walking, I just have to stop and eat some glucose tablets if I think I'm going too low. And so it is kind of a constant management. And right now, we have the Omnipod 5 accessible to us, both Android and iOS. And the Tandem Mobi works with the iOS, and it's accessible completely. And there's some more coming out that we're working with. We hope that eventually the twist pump will be. And this is a good reason to pay attention to all of the email lists and kind of keep in touch, because a year ago, 2 years ago, the answer to how many pumps were completely accessible was 0.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So this technology is rapidly changing, and it's just fantastic that blind people can say, we have 2 choices. I want tubing. I want the little Mobi. It has features that I really like. You know, my doctor likes its algorithm better. And some of us can say, ooh, no tubing. Cool. And I've used the Omnipod for a long time. I'm going to stay there. And you
Because of no
can,
tubing?
no tubing. It's what's called a patch pump. And so you put the insulin in the pod and you stick it on your arm, and then it just talks Bluetooth. And with any pump for anyone, you can get a 30-day trial period. So, for instance, if you talk to your trainer and you go, I'm going to try the Omnipod, and then you go, oh, I hate this, I'm going to go try the Mobi. You can do that. So you can get your hands on it. You can play with it. But I would encourage anyone, be they sighted or blind, you can set up a meeting with a trainer and go, let me get my hands on this pump. Let me see what it feels like. And then you can have that first meeting and do an interview. Look at the Omnipod, look at the Mobi, and go, which one do I like? And then you set it up. And if you set it up and within 30 days you go, nope, you go do the other one. And then you go, oh, I like that first one better, but you can do that.
Yeah, Cheryl, I know we're running out of time, so I just wanted to.
Yes,
Hope
we
that
are
answers your
at
question, JR.
1:30.
If not, reach out to us. We can give you some more information.
Yeah, we can
Yes.
connect him with someone else who's actually using the pump to have a private conversation, and that can be helpful.
Yeah, that would be cool because I mean, I guess I would kind of, kind of concerned about how, what apps you're using to set the pump up, or I mean, if you're just doing everything through the Dexcom app or.
No,
Yeah.
both the Omnipod and the Mobi have their own apps. And if you're
Okay.
a voiceover user or a talkback user and know how to use that feature, you're fine. It just reads you everything, and you just, learn what, to go through the prompts, and you can adjust your medication anytime you want and do everything a sighted person can do.
Excellent.
Okay, I just want to answer a few more of the questions before we say goodbye. Someone asked, does anyone know if Abbott or Dexcom have a representative that you can provide feedback to? These 3 people are the 3 people who are providing the feedback. They're working directly with the companies. And so I would say reach out to one of them if you have additional feedback. They also would know who the company representatives are to talk to as well.
I would
then
also like to quickly add that Dexcom, when you call Dexcom, if you choose training instead of tech support, their trainers are well-versed in voiceover. And so if you're having trouble, for instance, figuring out how to do something, they can explain it to you over the phone.
Oh, that's great to know. I also want to answer the question about the languages in Script Talk. There's actually many different languages available. I mean, I said Spanish, but there's multiple Spanishes, multiple Frenches based on country. So it's really going to be kind of determined by your phone. or the script dog device, just which one of those you're using, because they each support different languages. So I think we've addressed most of the actual questions. I just want to say a special thank you to all our panelists, and I hope that everybody enjoyed it and has a great day.
Well, thanks for having us, Charlotte.
Yeah,
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Yes,
Have a
thank
great
you.
day.